Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel Links deck profile. Today we're taking a look at Royal Rebels since it did just get a new skill and 2 new cards from the latest deck build box, which has allowed the deck to play a little bit differently. Now realistically the deck is still going to be doing mostly the same sort of thing, but it does it in a different way. And one of the new bosses we got really does change the way the deck works. Now the old skill we had was pretty good, or I guess still is pretty good in a lot of ways, because it lets you get out your bosses without tributing, which you can then use to tribute to get out your other bosses to trigger their effects. The new skill lets us do that still, but adds a little bit more control and lets us plus, which is actually really, really good. So this is Hard Rock Overture, can be activated by sending one level 7 or 8 monster from your hand to the graveyard if all of the monsters in your constructed deck are light attribute fiend type monsters. Now, locking us into light attribute fiends is actually a little bit annoying, because there are quite a few dark attribute fiends we would like to be playing, such as the Shadow Buyer and the more recent Great Maju Gaza. We can't play either of those, which is quite disappointing. There are a few others we'd like to have, but those are the big ones. But we can place up to 2 level 8, notably not 7, so it has to be exactly level 8, monsters from your hand and or graveyard in face-up defense position. So what this means is we send 1, 7 or 8 from our hand to the graveyard, then we get to summon 2 level 8s from the graveyard. So effectively we -1, then we +2, so he ends up as a +1. So this skill is a plus, which is pretty good. From turn 2 onwards, you can then also add 1 level 8 monster from your graveyard to your hand. Again, has to be exactly level 8, which means playing level 7s can be a bit of a liability, because although we can send level 7s to the graveyard, we can't add them back to our hand, and we can't special summon them from the graveyard. But we can only do this once per duel. While a monster placed on the field using this effect is face up, it loses 1000 defense. That's quite important because we do now have 2 level 8 monsters with 2000 defense, which means they're going to come out as 1000 defense monsters. And its battle position can only be changed with a card effect. This turn, you cannot attack directly using a monster that has an original level of 7 or higher. So this attack restriction is actually quite annoying. It didn't come up as much as I was thinking. So the big example people use is that if, for example, we do get off a Royal Rebel Doom Metals effect, we wipe our opponent's board, we now can't attack with our Doom Metal. And that is quite frustrating, but for the most part, we're planning to be using Hard Rock anyway. We'll get into that in a little bit. But what we can do with Doom Metal still, wipe our opponent's board and then summon out, for example, a couple of Cul-de-sac who can then still attack our opponent directly. As long as we have monsters that have an original level that is not 7 or higher, those can still attack. So in this deck specifically, that would also include Royal Rebel Shout. And there can be some situations where we can lethal our opponent, even if we can't attack with our level 8 and highs. So we'll go through the boss monsters. First up, we have our brand new boss monster, Royal Rebels Hard Rock. So this is a pretty cool card. It's level 8, 2500 attack, 2000 defense. During the turn that you normal summon this card by treating 2 level 7 or higher fiend monsters, so that is the same restriction that we basically get on Royal Rebels Doom Metal, where we do need those 2 level 7 or higher fiends. We can choose 1 level 7 or higher face-up monster on your opponent's field. Now notably, this has to be a 7 or higher. This is something I did trip up with a little bit in testing. We have to make sure the monster we're targeting is level 7 or higher, but we do have ways to make our opponents have a higher level, and we'll get into that as we get to it. But then we can inflict damage to our opponent equal to the difference between the chosen monster's attack and this card's attack. Which means ideally we want them to either have very small attack, so we get a big burn, or very large attack, so we have a big burn. But this card also gains attack equal to the chosen monster's attack until the end of this turn. So usually the way we want this to go is that our opponent will have ideally a big monster and a little monster both in attack position. We will gain the attack of the big monster. Ideally it's very big, so we get to do some burn damage as well. Then we attack over the little monster for a ridiculous chunk of damage. That is the way we want this to work. It doesn't always work out that way though. So we're going to jump ahead because I think the next card is quite important to talk about. This is Perion the Star Knight. This is a card that's been out for a long time, but hasn't really ever seen any play because it's a little bit awkward. But this card is very, very good in this deck. This is another level 8 monster. Again, 2500 attack. Again, 2000 defense. So again, if we summon this off the skill, it will have 1000 defense. Send the top card of your deck to the graveyard. Choose 1 face-up monster on your field and 1 face-up monster on your opponent's field. So there has to be a face-up monster on your opponent's field to activate and resolve this effect. Increase those monsters' levels by 2, and they gain 500 attack. So if our opponent has, for example, a level 4 monster, we could activate the skill, grab 2 Perions from the graveyard, summon them both, activate their effects, make that opponent's level 4 now into a level 8, which means we can now use Royal Rebels Hard Rock on it. Regardless of what the monster is though, even if it is a high level monster already, we still want to pump up that monster's attack, because that way, if it's already got a lot of attack, it gets more attack, which means we steal more attack, and the burn is more. But if the opponent's monster's attack is basically the same as ours, or just a little bit lower. We're doing less burn, but we'll still be gaining more attack from Royal Rebel's Hard Rock's effect. So all in all, Perion is actually one of the stars of this deck, and being able to loop this card is how we've actually won quite a few games with it. Now, the ways we get this back, again, we can use the skill to just bring 2 of them back, use their effects, and then tribute them off. That's the general way we go about it. But we can also use Phaser to bring back Perion as well. Phaser typically is going to want to be used to bring back Perion, so we can activate its effect and then tribute it off, or bring back Chiron, because getting that piercing is really good. And we should mention Chiron. Chiron is the only level 7 we're playing, and that's because, again, 7s are a bit of a liability. We can still activate the skill by discarding it, but we can't get it back, which is kind of annoying. The way that we typically want to get this on the board is by using Phaser's effect. But Perion is still really important because we can still get that piercing damage, which, depending on the matchup, can be really important. If your opponent's just setting a bunch of monsters, well, a lot of our guys don't do anything against set monsters, right? Hard Rock does nothing, Doom Metal does nothing, and Heavy Metal also does nothing against set monsters. I mean, Perion also does nothing against set monsters, but that doesn't really matter. So the way that we're going to deal with our opponent's set monsters is with Chiron and with the Curse of the Rising Light. So our other bosses, we'll go through them very quickly. Royal Rebels Doom Metal. Again, this is a card that I think a lot of people are like, why would you play this card? Because you can't attack directly the time you use it. One of the common plays we did use is Doom Metal just wipes the opponent's board, does a crap ton of burn damage, and then we could summon something like either double Cul-de-sac, or we could summon out this Shout, and then just have those 2 monsters attack directly, and that plus the burn damage that we got from the Doom Metal was enough to finish the game. So Doom Metal is actually still really, really good. There will be some situations where your opponent just makes a big board, and we just have to Doom Metal it, even if we don't get any damage in. It's just a way to clear the board, ideally set some trap cards, and go on the defensive, and that will come up quite a decent amount, so I do think Doom Metal is very important for this deck. Also, just having more 8s is always really important. Then we have Heavy Metal. Heavy Metal did come up a decent amount. Heavy Metal typically was the boss we would go into if we didn't want to activate our skill. So if we weren't using the skill, we could go into this and ideally just swarm the board with big guys and try and kill our opponent, but this was very awkward. This didn't happen quite the way we wanted to all the time, but Heavy Metal still did come up a decent amount, was able to pop a card, and was able to gain that attack and get in for some good lethal damage. Then we'll talk about the other new card we had, Faceless Cul-de-sac. So this is a level 6 1500 attack monster, but we can special summon this card from our hand face up to our field by revealing 1 other fiend type monster from our hand. So this is already pretty good, means we can basically get it out for free, and it's a level 6 monster, which means we contribute it to summon Heavy Metal and get its effect off. But we can also use Perion's effect to boost up Cul-de-sac's level up to 8 if we do need another 8 and we don't have access to one. But its other effect is that it has the continuous effect, base up fiend monsters on your field gain 300 attack. So if we summon this out, itself becomes an 18. If we get 2 out, they become 21. And there you can see if we go Doom Metal, burn our opponent for a bunch, we then have 4200 damage between 2 cul-de-sacs that can attack our opponent directly. And this can be very, very good. Next up, we have Shout. And Shout might seem like a bit of a suspect inclusion, but this is actually really, really key to the deck. So it's a level 4 monster that only has 1200 attack, 0 defense, not the best. If your opponent has a face-up level 7 or higher monster on their field, send 1 card from your hand to the graveyard. Sending a card from my hand to the graveyard isn't that bad in this deck, but it can be a little bit annoying. But the most annoying restriction on here is that your opponent has to have a level 7 or higher. So your opponent just set a bunch of cards, we can't just use this effect. But why do we want to use this effect? Well, we can send 2 random cards from your opponent's hand to the graveyard. So that will do 2 things. First off, if they have 2 or less cards in their hand, that will now turn off Shiny Shady. And that is really important because our deck is very vulnerable to just trap cards that activate on summon. We can't really do anything about Trap Hole, and we have lost many games because of Trap Hole. It's quite frustrating. But if our opponent has Shady and Trap Hole, and they activate those on summon, well then none of our guys will get to resolve their effect. That does kind of suck. So Shout will turn off Shady, which is really important. The other thing it does is it will turn on our Curse of the Rising Light. If our opponent again has 2 cards or even 3 cards in hand, we can get rid of those cards to allow Curse to be used to allow us to change battle positions. And again, Curse is extremely important because by flipping our opponent's monsters up, we can now hit them with all our effects. We can pop with Heavy Metal, we can pop with Doom Metal, we can gain attack and burn our opponent with Hard Rock. It just kind of turns everything on. So Curse is so unbelievably important in here, and Shout is the card that does turn it on. We've already spoken about Phaser, but again, really, really good. The only annoying part of this is that we can't get back Cul-de-sac, but again, most of the time we're getting back Perion or we're getting back Chiron. That's our ideals. We are playing the Pot of Greed. This, again, could be swapped out for a different legend spell, and then we could use a different trap, such as Negate Attack if we're worried about specific matchups, or the Compulsory Evacuation device. But in this, I do prefer Pot of Greed personally. Then we go on to our traps. We've gone with Riding, and the reason I've chosen Riding is because if we are to use Shady, one, we now need to keep cards in our hand, which can be a little bit annoying. Like, sometimes it's fine, sometimes it's not. But also, flipping our opponent's cards face down is kind of antithetical to what we're trying to do. If our opponent's monsters are face down, we now need to find Chiron to pierce over them. We now need to find Curse of the Rising Light to flip them up so that we can use all our effects. So the logic behind not using it is because we want our opponent's monsters face up. The downside is, Execute You Riding does not do what Shady does. In some situations, your opponent will just kill you because you didn't have Shady. Shady also can be useful to use on our own monsters. For example, when we summon our monsters using our skill, they come out with 1,000 less defense. But if we flip them down, again, I haven't tested this, but I believe they will be treated as having 2,000 defense again, which can come up and actually can be really useful. So although I think Shady is still really, really good, we haven't tried it in this build. I still want to test it in the future because I think Shady potentially could still be really, really good in this deck. I think just having a bunch of traps to kind of slow the game down could be really, really advantageous. But we've been trying out Riding, and Riding has been okay. I don't want to say Riding was perfect for the deck. I don't want to say Riding felt super fantastic, but it felt pretty good. So, you know, our opponent summons a monster, we get to summon out something from our grave. Typically, it will be like a 2,500 guy, and then we reduce our opponent's monster's attack. In some situations, that is enough. And realistically, what we really want our traps to do is just allow us to survive. We don't necessarily need to make it so our board can't be broken or anything. We just need to survive to the next turn, because this deck is quite good at threatening lethal. The issue, again, is going to be, does your opponent have trap cards to stop you? If your opponent does have those annoying trap cards that can kind of get in the way and stop our monsters from resolving their effects, such as Trap Hole, which has actually been the most annoying trap card for us playing this deck, then there's not really much you can do. But if they don't have the trap cards, we can threaten lethal quite a lot. And then lastly, we have the Trap Hole. That's because we wanted to use the Pot of Greed, so our Legend Trap had to be either this or Widespread, and Trap Hole is a little bit more useful in the current meta. So what are the other cards that we're not using? The big one we're not using is Ghost Cyclone. I think Ghost Cyclone is a pretty good card, and I guess by extension, we should talk about Genie's Fire Breath as well. We're not playing Back Row Hate because, again, as long as we have access to Shout and Shout is online, we don't have to worry about Shady, so we're only worrying about a Legend Trap anyway. And if our opponent has multiple sets and we do have Back Row Hate, we now need to make sure that we just guess the right back row a lot of the time. We have to make sure we just snipe the right one, otherwise the trap's going to be live anyway. So we're not playing the Back Row Hate, and overall, it's hard to say if our win rate would have been better with the Back Row Hate or without it. This deck did do quite well. Our win rate with this deck was actually pretty good. We did actually do quite well with the deck, but the deck is somewhat prone to bricking. So the issue this deck has, in my opinion, is you don't want to find a hand that has just high-level monsters, but you also don't want to find a hand that has no high-level monsters. And if you ever find yourself in that situation where you have, again, just all high levels or no high levels, you can't really do anything. If you have a hand of all high levels, you can activate the skill. You can discard one, summon 2 cards. You've now got 2 cards left in your hand, so you've sort of emptied your hand a little bit, but you've still only got 2 monsters on the field, which unfortunately is not really great, because you could then tribute those monsters to summon something else, but now you've only got 1 monster on the field and you're passing the turn, so you're almost certainly dead on the follow-up. So it's not really great. If you have no high levels, you can't activate the skill. We can't plus. All of our low-level monsters have 0 defense and can't really do anything, so we're just kind of passing and hoping we draw into bosses next turn. Again, we're just hoping we don't die. It's sort of similar to Fullmetarion in a way, where Fullmetarion don't want to find all spell traps and they don't want to find all monsters. This deck is in a very similar situation where you don't want to find all high levels, you don't want to find no high levels. So it can be very, very awkward. Whenever you get a hand like that, you're probably going to lose. Unfortunately, some of the decks are just too consistent and too quick, like Spellcasters. Again, that deck will just almost always do the exact same turn 1. Like, they'll either get the really high roll turn 1 or they get the regular turn 1, both of which are very, very punishing, do so much damage to you. But this deck can, like we say, threaten lethal quite a lot. Surprisingly, Hard Rock did a lot of heavy lifting. I actually think Hard Rock is a lot better than people give it credit for. We're able to use this to, again, just burn for a ton, grab a load of attack, and ideally ram into a lower attack monster, which we could either give Piercing, which is pretty good, that can oftentimes just win the game, or Curse to flip it up and then run into it with the Hard Rock like that. So I do think this deck is very fun. I think the deck, if you draw good hands, can be very strong. The issue this deck has, in my opinion, is consistency. I don't think this deck is going to consistently draw good hands. I don't think this deck is going to consistently find all the outs you need to what your opponent has. And I don't think this deck is going to consistently win games all the time. So how competitive this deck is, I don't know. My gut feeling is this is going to be low tier 3, high rogue kind of area. I doubt it will be much higher than that. But again, I hope there might be some like secret build that someone comes up with that ends up being really, really strong. And maybe we can make this deck a little bit competitive. But as far as some replays, I could show what I've been talking about